As many of you may know, Canada has had marriage equality since 2003, becoming the fourth country in the world to ratify it. Yay, Canada. Founder of the Metropolitan Community Church, the Reverend Troy Perry, whose picture will be shown here shortly, married his longtime partner, Philip DeBleek, shortly thereafter at MCC Toronto nearby, and asked their home state of California to recognize it when they eventually returned. They were represented there by lawyer extraordinaire, whom some of you may recognize, Gloria Allred. And in that picture, by the way, can you find Waldo? Let me give you a hint. He's behind that Get Equal Repeal DOMA sign. And guess what? After this lawsuit, they actually won in the state of California in May of 2008. But the story doesn't end there. The anti-marriage equality folks, mostly consisting of the Mormon and Catholic Church, pulled their resources together, and by the November election, the same time the country voted for Barry, those of you who are on the Christmas Eve service know who I'm referring to, this deep blue state also enshrined in its constitution a discriminatory law known as Prop 8 that will not be overturned and repealed until the Supreme Court made a decision in 2013 to grant marriage equality to all in the US. So in the meantime, I knew I had to do something, so I started working for California Faith for Equality. And this happened during the summer of 2008 when I did a bunch or organized a bunch of phone banking events and rallies and talked to clergy and faith leaders of all stripes about why marriage equality was important to me. Unfortunately, secular organizers were not as comfortable doing so, many of them having had bad experiences with people of faith before, and trust me, I get it. After all, I too was raised as an evangelical Christian. Been there, done that, bought the unfashionable homophobic t-shirt. I knew, however, that the way to change people's hearts isn't about talking about rational things like how many rights queer folks don't get, or the difference between domestic partnerships or civil unions and marriage. It's not to outquote each other on biblical passages, which, trust me, I could do like the best of them. Thank you very much. The key, however, to unlocking fear and homophobia is by telling our stories, which is exactly what Obama's campaign did so successfully. Remember, he started out as a community organizer in Chicago. So we, meaning California Faith for Equality and the campaign and I, instead of sulking and blaming each other about why we lost marriage equality in California, we decided to focus on organizing the BIPOC community and people of faith instead. We partnered with this organization called Courage Campaign, who use Marshall Gantz's model, which I introduced last week, and we shared our story of self, our story of us, and our story of now up and down the Golden State. So this is an image of me doing a workshop in Santa Barbara, California. And they thought that not many people were interested in talking about faith. So they reserved a very small, tiny room. And needless to say, you could see from this picture that we had an overflow crowd and they had to put some more chairs outside that room. And when we were telling our stories, I tell you, there were so many tears shed around the heartbreak of coming out to families, of getting kicked out of their childhood churches, of being labeled as sinners going to hell. At the same time, we heard so many stories of resilience, of the fact that most of the phone banking that took place actually took place in houses of worship, specifically in many Unitarian Universalist congregations. And we heard so many stories of faithful clergy who remain steadfast in their moral conviction, even if it cost them their jobs and even at the risk of costing them their congregants. What I learned is that a heady intellectual debate isn't what's going to necessarily change people's minds. Again, we transform hearts by telling our stories because, as I mentioned in my videos about mission and vision, we have to let people know who we are, why we exist, and what our faith is all about. Like many of you who wrote in the chat box, Angela's retelling of the story, I so appreciate because that Edict of Torda gets to the core of the message of what our forebears believed about religious freedom and why it matters that we, as UUs, believe in the right of conscience, of why we believe in it enough to make it a part of our fourth principle. I was also so moved by Reverend Mwibutsa's courageous story and vision born from a prison cell, reminding us of the power of our liberating faith in East Africa and beyond. We Unitarian Universalists have a story to tell the nations, do we not? So, what's been the flaming chalice that has been burning brightly here in Toronto since 1845? Let me shift and tell you that story. You see, 180 years ago, 15 British and Irish immigrants pulled together a little over $200. I don't know what that would mean in today's world with inflation and everything, but it's still not a big sum of money. But rather, they came here to plant a seed of love, hope, and transformation in the heart of Toronto. And how does one even begin to summarize what's happened since? I could go through the long list of my predecessors, ministers, some more controversial and colorful than others. But lately, I must say, you've had two super long-term ministers, as well as interims in between, some lasting 1 year and others lasting 2. So you probably know the drill by now of what we as interims are tasked to do. Number one, we're tasked to take a look at your history and heritage, which is what we're doing now. And trust me, ever since I started, I've discovered tons of history. And again, some more checkered and colorful than others. And number two, we've reviewed what your current needs are, or our task is to review them anyway, including the possibility of leadership changes. And number three, we are tasked to make connections with folks outside of the congregation, like the CUC, other clergy folks, and even other congregations in the GTA. So by us having joint worship services together with Neighborhood, for example, that's one way that we've been able to connect outside of our congregation. And number four, we as interims are tasked to help you think about your future and make sure that you're different ready enough as you begin the search process for a settled minister. And finally, number five, to redefine the purpose and direction of the congregation. In other words, your mission, which has indeed evolved over the years. And this is indeed what the journey groups are discussing in the here and now. During this time, you have put that mission into action by aiding hurricane victims, by performing holy unions since the 1970s, and becoming a welcoming congregation in the late 1990s, and supporting Syrian refugees and other refugees who are fleeing political or religious persecution, becoming a green sanctuary, and partnering with an indigenous group. These are just some or the tip of the iceberg of all the activities that you have done in order to fulfill your mission. And guess what? You've had a physical home that has anchored you over the years, beginning with the Jarvis Building built in 1852. And that has been your home for 100 years, followed by 175 St. Clair, which lasted almost 70 years. But who the building house was actually more important than the building itself. In other words, the building is just an edifice. And unfortunately, over the years, I know way too many congregations that suffer from an edifice complex where they pour all their resources into their building instead of recognizing that the building is the one that's supposed to serve the people and not the other way around. I believe what makes First You so unique is that you actually recognize that your mission cannot and couldn't possibly be contained by just one building. That's why you went ahead and seeded and gave birth to at least 5 other congregations in the GTA, in the Greater Toronto area. And you also knew that where you were no longer reflected your mission at 175 St. Clair, because your mission, after all, is not to stay in a street full of high rises and luxury condominiums. Amen. You knew that the city has moved beyond the British and Irish immigrants that originally founded the congregation. So you wanted to have an outreach to the whole entire world. And as we know, the whole world has come to Canada, right? Which is why Oakwood Vaughan seemed more like the logical next place that you could call home. And how about that renovation project, eh? It sure has not been an easy one. Those of you who are familiar with the Exodus story in the Hebrew Bible may recall the grumblings that took place in the wilderness after they left Egypt. And who could blame them? It took them 40 years, and all they had to eat was manna, manna, manna. Well, First You, the good news is it's only been 2.5 years since you moved out of 175, 1/16th of the time that it took the people of Israel to move from Egypt to the Promised Land. So I'm just saying, we're far away from that 40 years at this point. I know, I get it. It is a long time. 2.5 years is a long time. And throughout this whole time, you have remained faithful and steadfast with your call, creating opportunities online to provide healing, spiritual sustenance, and hope to so many from around the world. Nothing can stop you from singing beloved hymns and making beautiful music together. This is the story of us, a people bold and tenacious enough to stick around even when the times are tough, and even in the midst of all the uncertainties in the life of this congregation.